Welcome to the Docs Who Lift podcast, where we distill and simplify the complexities of a healthy lifestyle, exercise, medicine, and weight loss. We're excited to bring you a podcast that's a prescription for clinical practice, scientific recommendations, and just real life. This is the Docs Who Lift podcast.
Hey, and welcome back to the Docs Who Lift podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Spencer Nadolsky. You got my co-host, Dr. Karl here. We're both back from spring break. Sorry for the, couple week hiatus, whatever, if anybody actually cares. They don't care. Anyway, a few interesting tidbit studies that have come out we want to chat about. One of them being some mechanisms that were kind of disputed about how tirzepatide, if people know it as Zepbound and Mounjaro, Zepbound being the weight management version and Mounjaro being the type 2 diabetes version, both of them the same drug, just different brands, and how it works for weight loss. Some cool mechanistic stuff that we'll get into. We can go into a few actually interesting case that I had yesterday that related to tirzepatide and some of the hypothetical risks of depression, anhedonia, just kind of feeling like blah, I don't really feel like doing anything, and what I did for that, and a few other real world studies that my brother's going to bring up. So why don't we go into the first, that mechanistic study of Zepbound. You'll hear it every day in the comments. Patients, they swear up and down they've been eating 1,200 calories, they cannot lose weight, they do tirzepatide, and boom, they lose 50 pounds. Now, if you are an energy balance researcher who's been doing this, it's clear that that's not possible. However, people swear up and down that they were eating barely any calories. Well, one of the mechanisms at play, first of all, everybody says these drugs work by helping people eat fewer calories. That's pretty well established, but people think it has to be something else beyond that because people feel like they're already eating too few of calories.
Well, and because this is by far the most efficacious,
just ridiculous.
Meaning it works the most for people to lose weight. I mean, we've noted this, at least anecdotally, over all the years of our education and training and practice of obesity medicine and type 2 diabetes, that people say, I'm just not eating much, I'm doing everything I can, I don't lose weight, and then we put them on even just the classic old school appetite suppressant phentermine, and suddenly they lose weight, and that's been very well established as purely only an appetite suppressant, or Qsymia, the phentermine topiramate, or even the naltrexone bupropion, etc., in addition to all the GLP-1 receptor agonists for obesity and type 2 diabetes. So this is not like a new thing. It's just that it's but the Zepbound Mounjaro is just so much more efficacious than all those old ones. So it's like, okay, so people are like, well, what is going on? And there have been inklings of mechanistic plausibility that have been thrown out there in the literature that maybe there is an increase in metabolic rate. I mean, there are studies that not studies necessarily, but reviews that mention it. And we've struggled to find where it actually supports that, other than maybe in some bench research. So, animal studies.
We've gone to, we go to the obesity week, whether it's me or my brother, every single year. We meet the researchers, the bench researchers, we're the clinicians, but the people doing animal studies. And one of the big ones, it was last year and the year before, it was mice. They're showing, hey, it looks like maybe the whole metabolic adaptation thing, tirzepatide helps it. And there's some thought that semaglutide does it. For anybody who's listening, metabolic adaptation.
What is that?
People know it from the Biggest Loser studies, and that's our buddy Kevin Hall, who we need to get him on here at some point. He'll do a better job at explaining it. But imagine this. You lose weight. Say you're 200 pounds. You go down to 150 pounds. Based on calculations, you should have a certain metabolic rate at that 150 pound weight. But once you lose 50 pounds from that 200 pounds, what happens is this metabolic adaptation, your metabolic rate is lower than what would be expected if you were just 150 pounds to begin with. So meaning your metabolism goes down further than what would be expected. That's this metabolic adaptation. It's the difference between what you'd expect and what it actually is. Now, it's not like remarkably, it's not that much, but
And in fact, Kevin Hall was the one who showed in all those studies that the weight regain was actually more, in fact, it was almost all due to the increased of caloric intake due to the resulting hunger and all the other physiology, right?
Not due to
without a lot of contribution from the metabolic adaptation. But it's still there, and I still always tell people about it. I'm like, hey, it's working against you. You know, when people lose weight, why do people regain weight? It's working against them in a lot of times. But
so let's say tirzepatide has some magic over semaglutide, more so than just a caloric decrease, a decrease in caloric intake, meaning you're eating fewer calories. Well, that's probably the case because what they found out is that in humans, there wasn't it didn't help anything with metabolic adaptation. But if it were the case, over time, you would see people on tirzepatide likely lose more weight than on semaglutide if that were part of the mechanism. But what it's likely is tirzepatide's that much stronger at helping people eat fewer calories. And actually, Kevin Hall had the mathematical models out of how many fewer calories, and people eat fewer calories on tirzepatide than semaglutide. So when this gets back to the morality that we put around eating. People feel that eating a certain amount of calories is tied to willpower and how much discipline that you have, as opposed to a biological function. And I think that's part of the issue, is that when people are out there saying, I swear I'm eating 1,200 calories, and you say, look, I don't know what to tell you. The medicines help you by eating fewer calories. They get these people get upset. They're basically
sometimes
saying,
it feels, I think some of them feel like they're, maybe being attacked. A lot of people just know. I mean, a lot of people, they have insight into how they're feeling. They kind of understand when we talk about the appetite circuits, the hunger hormones, the dopamine reward system hormones. And those are really kind of separate things that are, working against people in different ways depending on their genetics. But there are, some people really, I think some people really do think they're not eating that much. And I always tell patients, well, it's like the front part of your brain that's telling you what to do. You know what to do, your executive function. It's all the other parts of the brain working with all of our hunger, appetite, craving hormones working against you that you don't even really notice it. I mean, we always use the example of studies in the past where I think people are like literally recorded what they're eating, and they still underreport it, even though they know they're being recorded.
Yeah, that
and so there's a lot to it.
It was like 1991, they figured out how to do doubly labeled water, where you can see how much energy people are expending. They figured this out.
We were not doing the research at this time.
You and I sure as hell were not.
we were little kids.
We were little kids, and sure as hell we probably. I mean, actually, I do. There are some companies that want me to use doubly labeled water in some of my studies that I'm doing, which I would let them do it. It's very interesting.
God knows we don't need you trying to publish real data. That'd
screw that up.
Yeah, we'll all be screwed.
Anyway, they found that people were swearing up and down they're eating 1,200 calories. And when they did the doubly labeled water, they were off, anywhere from 50, I don't know, even up to 100%. Like you're just eating
substantial amounts. It's a big. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard.
And people feel really bad about it. It's like, no, you shouldn't feel bad about it. It's really hard to not eat that much.
It's not your fault. It is biologic. We could call it physiology, but it's really pathophysiology in a lot of people, depending, and everyone's different. We all got different genetic backgrounds. We live in this food environment, this built environment that's working against us. We always say the genetics loads the gun, our environment pulls the trigger. It's not your fault. It's hard.
Now, people are asking, what about retatrutide? That's the new one coming out. The triple G, GIP, GLP-1, and glucagon.
Triple G spot.
That's very likely you're going to hit the triple G spot, and you're going to increase your metabolic rate. And that's why we're seeing fat just melt. Actually, you know what? I have a few patients that have been in the clinical trials. We should have them on the podcast to go over their experience.
Yeah. Although, boy,
Maybe
it makes me nervous when, nowadays that people are starting to discuss their experiences in these trials that are supposed to be like really, kind of top secret because you don't want anyways.
Published. I don't know, but the fat's melting.
But the glucagon is the key. So, not that we need to get into that, physiology of glucagon, but it's our counter-regulatory hormone. Essentially, it's kind of the opposite of insulin. So in type 1 diabetes or anybody who takes insulin, we provide it as an emergency treatment if someone has hypoglycemia. And so it's just another one of these, neuro gut hormones. But this one does have more established metabolic rate influence in humans.
What's interesting is that GLP-1 actually counteracts glucagon.
Yeah, I know. There's all sorts of things that don't make a lot of sense to even those of us in clinical practice. And in fact, it confuses the researchers because they're going, wait, if we agonize this one or if we antagonize it, somehow it's working when we combine them all. I don't know. It's crazy stuff.
It's pretty interesting. We're going to see there's going to be a lot of stuff coming out there. Yeah. So anyway, retatrutide probably does increase your metabolic rate some, and that's why we're seeing fat just melt off people, and people are losing probably more weight than they should in certain cases. So that will be really interesting. Anyway, for tirzepatide, still the mechanism seems to be you eat a lot less than what you were before, and that's okay. It's nothing to be ashamed of. I don't know.
So the bottom line is the study that we're talking about. It was what they did was they did a trial in mice, and then they did just a small phase 1 trial in humans to kind of compare the two. And in the mice, it did what they call attenuate the metabolic adaptation, but it did not impact the metabolic adaptation in people. But people are taking in. It said it certainly reduced their intake by reducing their appetite and thus increasing fat oxidation, but still reduced their sleeping and 24-hour energy expenditure rate.
Right, people will be like, "Oh, the fat oxidation," but it doesn't matter if you're not in a calorie deficit. Fat oxidation, it doesn't matter. So. There you go. I do want to talk about a case here because we talked about it last time, talking about that Ben Bickman guy and all his ideas of suicidal ideation. But you do notice that this medicine can dampen what I would say pleasure. And if it dampens it too much, you could get what's called an anhedonia. Now, I just described this as kind of the feeling of, I don't feel like doing anything that feels pleasurable. That's not a good way to live. We don't notice it too often in this medicine, but there's something to it biologically, and we do see cases of this, and it's clear when you start adjusting the medicines up and down that some people feel this way. Some people are like, they don't feel like having intercourse anymore. That's not common, but it can happen. One of the things that one patient even mentioned they just loved cooking before, and now they don't have that feeling. But is it because they're just kind of having they're kind of averse to food? I don't know. But this other particular case, they just didn't feel like working out anymore. They just kind of feel They didn't feel good, and they thought for sure it was from the medicine. And they were at a plateau. And I don't want to give too much information away, but it was a woman, 30s, 40s, plateau around, I don't know if they're in the high 20s BMI at this point, but they were on the 15 milligram dose. And they're explaining this to me, and I said, you know what? Why don't we drop you down from 15 milligrams to 10 milligrams of the Zepbound, tirzepatide? And we did. She said, too, that, you know what, I also was on bupropion years in the past. Do you think we should start that, too? I said, sure. So we did 2 variables at once.
Let's be clear. You said, hell yeah.
I said, let's do it. So we just started a little shtickle of bupropion, 150 milligrams, extended release of the 150 milligrams bupropion. 3 months later, I just had a follow-up visit. And I wasn't expecting, I would expect small little effects like,
this does make a lot of sense. I mean, maybe not for everyone listening, but it does what you're about to say makes sense, just in general, I think.
I was sitting there enamored over her story, and I just kept telling her, I gotta tell your story because this is so cool. She not only broke her plateau, she'd been plateaued for months on the 15. She went down to 10 now, lost 10 pounds. And she said, I'm back in the gym. I'm loving it. I feel great. 10 pounds. I mean, and again, I don't even care about the weight because metabolically she's healthy now. Like she's in the range where
but was it, do you think, because this is what, if people are not, when we talk about metabolic rate and, we talk about muscle mass and really what's really important is literally what's on the inside that counts. And so we need people exercising. If you're not feeling up for being up and moving, which is a substantial contributor to our metabolic rate, and exercising, which is exceedingly important for everyone, then that's a pretty easy way to plateau.
Yeah.
So, cutting down on the medicine that may have some contribution to that feeling, plus getting her back on appropriate therapy for mental health, but also, where we can talk a little bit about bupropion, and it's, it's obviously approved in combination with naltrexone for obesity. Now, it's, you're getting a little bit of all the worlds, and you're working up in those brain areas that deal with all this stuff, and suddenly life is better. She's working out, feeling better, and she's healthier. That's a great, story.
Yeah. So I posted it on Threads, and I need to put it on Instagram and maybe do a little quick video and TikTok maybe. But so other people started coming out going, oh my gosh, I've kind of felt similarly. What should I do? I'm like, please don't make me play Threads doctor right now. But I go, just bring this to your doctor and just discuss it. I don't know. I'm not practicing medicine over social media. But
it's something to study, these are why we have case reports, and maybe it needs to be published. And it can also play into, a lot of the concerns about the cost effectiveness, which actually could lead us to our next segment.
Yeah.
And it's recently published study.
But if you're feeling kind of a little bit, I see fatigue in this medicine often. It's not the calories. There's something about the medicine. My friends that are very smart neurobiologists believe that there are certain receptors that it hits that are similar to chemotherapy, that what makes people feel a little bit tired sometimes. So I think they're going to get better at hitting certain receptors and not hitting other receptors, and it'll get refined over time. But talk to your doctor if this is something you've experienced. Let's go into whatever.
And that leads us to, if people can get away with reducing the dose for maintenance, maybe feeling better and just doing better overall while still getting all the health benefits, that could be a big deal, because these are very expensive medications. So that brings me to another point. So this is a huge debate. It gets into politics. It gets into, the big corporate healthcare stuff. Are these medicines even cost effective? So just the other day, in the middle of March, the lifetime health effects and cost effectiveness of tirzepatide and semaglutide, again, Zepbound, Mounjaro, Ozempic, Wegovy, were studied in an economic evaluation versus some of the older ones that include phentermine topiramate, which is Qsymia, and naltrexone bupropion that you just mentioned, which is called Contrave. And so they compared these, and certainly, as we all know, if we look at the meta-analyses and just kind of comparing trials, tirzepatide and semaglutide obviously are much better at improving weight loss, and they also have the direct blood sugar benefits in diabetes. So then of course they prevent diabetes even better. They have the cardiovascular outcome benefits, complication benefits, and death. And so in this economic evaluation, the bottom line is those two were found to generate greater lifetime health gains by preventing diabetes, cardiovascular complications, and death compared with phentermine topiramate and naltrexone. However, this is the key, that they are not cost effective at their current net prices. And so now I don't know that anybody really cares exactly how they do this, but they used the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, 5,000 people, and it actually represents 126 million eligible U.S. adults aged 20 to 80 who would, in theory, meet clinical trial inclusion for anti-obesity meds. And what they do is they do this, I'm basically just reading this because God knows we don't know how to do this, individual level simulations that project long-term cardiometabolic outcomes based upon the data we have, something they call quality adjusted life years. Okay, so we want to know how long people are living and is it actually improving their lives, not just elongating them? And then, of course, healthcare expenditures. And then they do these, probabilistic sensitivity analyses. They do subgroup analyses. I mean, this is crazy stuff. They get into future costs, the quality of life years. They discount them 3% annually.
Whatever, just tell us the gist.
Yeah. Well, that was basically it. So large incremental, quality of life years gained with tirzepatide and semaglutide, but exceedingly expensive. And so they have this $100,000 per quality adjusted life year threshold, and the prices would have to be discounted another third for tirzepatide and 82% for semaglutide. However, this is interesting because we talk about Contrave in general not being that effective across the board, but it was cost savings due to its low cost and had an 89% probability of being cost effective at that threshold. And interestingly to me, which I don't understand how this is possible, but the phentermine topiramate only had a 24% probability of being that cost effective, but tirzepatide and semaglutide had a 0% chance. And so, when we talk about, you're talking about lowering these doses, and we're talking about trying to get the companies to get the vials out, and people are paying cash now because it's at least in the realm of affordable for people compared to, $1,000 a month. We're getting it down to, $500 a month. And while it's completely off label, and I'm not telling anybody to do this, there are ways to get the real medicines, not the compounded bullshit I wouldn't trust, I wouldn't take, nor tell anybody to take.
Lily's about to show up at your door. You better be careful. Lily they're going to have briefcases with
well, anyways, yeah. Basically, you can talk to your physicians about dosing methods off label, need to be studied more, but for cost effectiveness of these medications. And I do think it's the future, because if we can find a way to utilize lower amounts of these meds,
spread it out,
because they need to be long-term, generally speaking, for most people, to get all these benefits, we need to have better cost effectiveness, because we're all paying for it somehow.
$50. Come on.
Anyway,
we saw the Trump administration nixed the Biden's administration for Medicare and Medicaid to pay for it. The arguments are,
this is the argument. We can't afford it. That's the problem.
So that's the argument. But then some people are no, then they could negotiate directly. I'm I don't know. Just make it cheaper so everybody could just buy it cash anyway.
And this gets into the corporate medical industrial complex.
What a joke our system is.
I mean, it is a joke. So the healthcare insurance, so my big thing is, I blame big insurance companies, in coordination with big government insurance. I mean, it's all against us. The people, the quacks online claim it's the conventional doctors like us that practice science-based medicine. It's no, we're trying to work within the confines to help people. Let's get rid of the big insurance. Spencer's already done it, and everyone has to pay him cash up front. But there's got to be better ways. Something has to happen.
Give me all the money.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. I'll try to be the martyr and try to take down the big insurance companies and help people regardless.
I need an eyepiece and a top hat. I'm going to have bags with the money symbol.
Maybe I'll just help everyone for free, and I'll just come live with you.
Somebody spare a crumb, please. Spare a crumb.
But anyway, so that's the bottom. I mean, so yes, these are outstanding medicines, especially for type 2 diabetes and the highest risk people with, heart disease, sleep apnea, etc. But the costs have to come down.
There you go. There you have it, Lily. I know you're listening. You guys come, Novo and Lily. You come to me at the conference. I love your some of you execs listen to this, so you better.
So let's get the vials out. Let's make it cost effective. Let's get rid of the United States health insurance conglomerate screwing everybody. Be like anyways, whatever.
Yeah, whatever. Come on. Anyway, you got an appointment. I think you got to pay an appointment now. We got to go.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's the gist. Thanks for listening. Send this to somebody if you think, worrying about fatigue and some anhedonia, and then mechanisms for tirzepatide, and then the cost effectiveness. Here's our outro.
This podcast is for entertainment and education and information purposes only. Remember, the physicians on this podcast are not your physician. It should not be considered professional or personalized medical advice. It should not be used to replace speaking with your physician or medical professional to discuss your specific health concerns. The topics discussed should not be used solely to diagnose or treat any condition. As a result, we are not responsible for any unwanted medical outcomes. The views and opinions discussed are of those of the host only and do not represent those of any other entities.